Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
By giving people agency around their energy, around power, you are giving them power.
This is a moment in time with technological advancement that allows for humans to take advantage of the free aspect of energy.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.
Welcome back to another episode of Power to the People. This episode, John, you and I are going to dive a lot into kind of clean energy policy and what does that mean for all of these tax credits that are going on through the rest of the year? What can businesses do about it? How do you even go about some of these credits? But also, I wanted to start with just a bit about you. You're going to be regular on this because maybe you can define it a bit more. Like you're Mint's like resident everything, like science and credit, and just your knowledge goes so deep on just all of these different things in a way that kind of overwhelms like my brain of even trying to conceptualize it. So how did you be able to fit all of this info first into your brain, and then how'd you end up kind of in this position at Mint? Let's start there.
Well, I've been training for a long time. I have a strong academic background. I finished a PhD by the time I was 25 in environmental science and management. Just did a straight shot through school and then jumped out into the real world. Joined a nonprofit organization that was working on climate policy, among other things. And so I got, the kind of the hard science background, but also like the big picture. There was a lot of, very detail-oriented stuff in my academic career, but also very, very, big picture stuff. So, um, got a lot of practice in tying, the big scale and the small scale together and then communicating that in a way that hopefully is understandable by people that aren't me. So yeah, had that background and then joined Mint about 2.5, 3 years ago now, and have been loving doing all the incredible work that we get to do here. My focus has been a lot on the kind of the policy side, but specifically around financial incentives for clean energy is kind of my niche here. But yeah, as you said, I do kind of have all-purpose research skills that are used by others in the company
That's
from time to
awesome.
time. So yeah, happy to
On
happy to use my brain in that way.
Yeah, and on the clean energy side, I feel like it's been one of those industries that like it aggressively moved into the market, then it kind of stabilized a little bit. Now I feel like it's kind of getting momentum again. Where does that, just from your policy background, like where does that play into a business strategy? Because I mean, a lot of this clean energy discussion, it's not necessarily if now, it's more of a when. Like when is the right time to do it? Has that always been the case, and like why does it make sense now more than anything else from a finance standpoint?
Well, every technology that humans have invented has a life cycle. It has first it's born and then it grows up and then it has maturity and then maybe one day it will have its old age and decline. You can see that with the horse and buggy. We don't really have that too much these days, although some little pockets of society are holding out. Um, so, solar, wind, battery storage, EVs, all of those have that same trajectory of, they were conceptualized, most most of these were conceptualized quite a long time ago, over 100 years ago. And then, but it's really been, getting the technological development in place. It takes a long time, to build a solar panel that is affordable, effective, and reliable. Like that takes some doing, even though kind of the underlying principle of the technology is a lot kind of simpler and more foolproof than, other forms of power generation. So uh, that that development has been really guided along for better and for worse by policies passed by the federal government and by state governments. So um, the story of U.S. renewables like solar, wind, and to a lesser extent hydropower and geothermal and other things like that is told through government policies. And one of the big ones has been the investment tax credit. That's kind of like the one of the primary driving factors for solar and wind development in the United States, along with other policies like renewable portfolio standards and things like that. Um, so right now we're at a point where the technology is better than basically anything else that we have. It is cleaner, it is safer, it is more affordable, it is more reliable, and it uses essentially inexhaustible resources to generate electricity. The sun or the wind. Right now, the the technology is really solid, and there's still, of course, developments that are going to be made. Increases in efficiency, decreases in cost, increases in safety, particularly for technology like battery energy storage systems. We've seen just in the last few years the switch from nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistry to lithium iron phosphate chemistry is just increased the safety and reliability of these battery systems just tremendously.
How does that play into the bigger picture of it? Because I wonder on the battery side, because I feel like there is a shift going to battery, like being more of a priority than necessarily the solar itself, because I feel like we have a lot of panels. With that, why is the chemistry so important? Because I feel like it's one of those things where we just had some sort of breakthrough where it's like, okay, now is more of a tipping point for battery than ever before.
Yeah, well, so the different chemistries that you can use in battery energy storage systems or BESS are are really foundational in how the battery functions. So um, the nickel manganese cobalt chemistry NMC that was more common in the past, and it's still fairly common for certain uses because it has a higher energy density. So for the same amount of battery material, you can pack more power into it. And it has, some advantages with charging and discharging and, things like that. But it comes at a pretty big trade-off of the battery being more susceptible to thermal runaway, which is to say burning and possibly exploding, which is not ideal. And we've seen a lot of kind of high visibility cases like EV battery fires. Those are NMC. And just recently this year, the Moss Landing battery fire at the PG&E Vistra storage facility in Moss Landing, and that was also an NMC chemistry. And so the public perception of those kind of incidents is bad. And I mean, those kind of things are bad. The Moss Landing fire, while it didn't really directly impact any people, it did release a pretty good amount of nickel, manganese, and cobalt nanoparticles into the environment, which is not an ideal outcome by any stretch of the imagination, especially because those metals aren't really bio-friendly, as opposed to the new chemistry, which is lithium, iron, and phosphate, which are all things that are a bit more biocompatible, certainly. Um, so
So
yeah,
basically, the chemistry is getting better,
the chemistry is
and
getting better.
and the efficiency is getting better, and the safety is getting better. Now it's kind of just how does this fit into the system of business, essentially? Like how do
Yes,
you
right.
put this more into operations and plug it in?
Yeah, so we have some pretty dang good tools for generating and storing and shaping electrical load. Now it just has to we just have to figure out the best way to use them. And I think that we at Mint have a pretty good idea of how to use them. And so a big part of it is teaching other businesses, other companies, how to use these technologies to their advantage, because there are a ton of advantages that you can get out of it that haven't been possible before. It wasn't possible to generate your own power on site, in an affordable way, unless you happen to be sitting on top of an oil well that you own, and you had the refining and processing facilities on site, or, coal mine, and you could dig it out and burn it. Um, it's that kind of scenario is almost unthinkable, before distributed renewable energy resources came online.
Well, I also think you want your operational finance from an energy perspective to try and be more consistent. I mean, there's certain spikes and, peaks and valleys of when you're using energy, whether it be throughout the year or even throughout the day. And a a rate change on that could drastically change the cost of the business itself. So I think also it's part of smoothing out that curve of the cost of energy and then eventually obviously bringing it down. But it's kind of like smoothing that out for the unexpected speed bumps that usually come up just because of business.
Well, and the expected speed bumps. I mean, we've seen nothing but
Yeah.
energy prices increase. I mean, it's certainly here in California for, the past decade or more. And that
But
that's
that's not
that's
even
a
with
whole
generation going up, right? Is that
right.
pretty
No, no,
consistent?
that's 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 the increase in prices are mostly due to the way in which our electrical systems are run. The demand for energy in California at least has been, it's been largely offset by increases in energy efficiency. There was a really big push in the 90s and 2000s to basically get us more bang for our buck, when it comes to electrons, and that was super effective in achieving negawatts, as they called them. To offset the increase in population, and the drive in new technology like Silicon Valley and et cetera, up until now, that is, with the advent of large AI systems and the data centers that they rely on. That is it's concerning from an energy slash climate perspective, to say the least, to see this massive explosion in energy demand for technology that, you know, I mean, someday it will be quite useful, I would imagine,
Hmm.
if we get there. But for the meantime, it's kind of, we're in this early kind of ugly duckling stage
Hmm.
with AI, and
Yeah,
we
it's
have to
drawing
think
a
very,
lot of
very
energy.
carefully. We have to think
Yeah.
how we power AI in the next 10 years will essentially set the Earth's climate and biogeochemistry for the next 1,000 years.
I also think it's just going to affect the way energy is consumed by humanity, whether it be to power our homes and or our cities and or our agriculture or just what it's the energy distribution and the demand for energy just in general. I think is a huge draw for that. And I mean, I remember always driving by a bunch of these huge energy, whether it be an energy plant or a new solar farm, whatever is being set up. How traditionally are those financed? Because unless a company is just sitting on cash, there's not really a way to build these systems without some sort of incentive loan. I mean, how does usually the finance side of energy systems work when it's a business entity?
Well, if it's utility scale, there's kind of a split, right? There's like the really big stuff that the utilities themselves do, which can be in collaboration with municipalities, cities, counties, et cetera, that have land, and private developers that are the ones that are actually building the stuff, and then but the utilities like PG&E or SDG&E are the ones that are commissioning and paying for this stuff. Looking at it from a smaller individual corporation, not looking for anything utility scale. Um, there are in terms of financing, there are a lot of ways to fully or partially cover the cost of these systems. Obviously, a big one that I think about are the state and federal incentives. So tax credits, grants, rebates, those can knock a pretty significant chunk off the top of the cost of the project. And then there are also clean energy financiers, specific investment groups that look for these types of opportunities and are willing to, put down the cash up front to get them built because they are solid investments. It's not just about the power. There's real money to be made off of these things because they are reliable, they are safe, they are secure.
Well, and now we're getting to this point where a lot of those incentives are kind of starting to expire because for numerous reasons, but also the industry itself is also maturing. It's starting to get to a point where it is starting to run as almost a normal industry. What does it look like for people who are wondering, dust is now kind of settled in a way. Now where do we go from here of how do we take advantage of any incentives or clean energy projects? And what are those timelines? When should a business actually take action on it? Or is it already too late to do it? Where are we at?
Yeah. So there are several credits that are basically being cut at various times. So the clean energy vehicle credits, so that's new, used, and commercial vehicle credits, those are all going away uh, at, at at the end of September of this year. And then the residential energy efficiency and clean energy credits are being cut at the end of this year, so December 31st, 2025. And then January 1st, 2026, the next day, the some new restrictions go into place for the ITC, the investment tax credit, and its twin, the production tax credit, the PTC, which are, I mentioned I've kind of been the big driving forces behind the growth of solar and wind in the United States. And those restrictions are they're um, known by a number of acronyms, FEOC, or PFB, foreign entities of concern or prohibited foreign entities. So basically, you can't buy stuff that's majority made in China anymore.
Yep.
That's what it boils down to. There's four countries that are covered under this, or rather, there are four countries where companies cannot be incorporated in. It's gets a little technical there, but
Hmm.
basically it's China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So, and the only one that really has any impact on the clean energy industry is China. So really,
Got it.
this is a ban on Chinese products
So
for the clean energy.
that's more of like supply chain centric, saying, hey, if you're gonna get materials, maybe these tax credits still apply, but if the materials come from over here, then nah, sorry.
Yes, yeah. So essentially, if you have a product, if your project relies on product manufactured products that are 50% or more from a company that is incorporated in China or has some type of interaction with a Chinese company, then you're no longer eligible for the investment tax credit after the end of this year. So that's a big one. If
Okay.
you want to try to claim the investment tax credit and you have a supplier that maybe is you get your solar panels are 55% Chinese manufacturer, then you want to move on that as soon as you possibly can. Um, and so those are the big ones for this year, but there's also kind of into the first half of next year. There's some important things too. So July in July of next year, the alternative fuel infrastructure credit, which was for installing essentially EV chargers or any type of
Any
alternative
type.
fuel.
So it could have been
It
it
could
could
have
have
been hydrogen,
been
it could have been biodiesel. Yeah.
interesting.
In low income or disadvantaged communities across the country, that one is going away. And then the energy efficiency for credits for commercial properties and the new homes, those also expire. And so for the ITC and the PTC, for any solar and wind projects, that want to claim the tax credit will have to start construction by July of next year in order to get what's called safe harbored. Otherwise, they will need to be placed in service that is like basically fully built by December 31st, 2027 to claim the credit. So there's a few key
So either
dates.
build quickly or start building quickly and then extend the project if needed. But that's more or less your window that we're operating under.
Yeah, you want to, if you can, start building immediately. Certainly before July of next year. You want to commence construction, you know, source your materials, start, making like purchases and things like that, to show the IRS that like, hey, I'm getting safe harbored this year. I'm going to get this credit. And there's some good news and bad news about safe harboring, but that generally would be, yeah, that's generally the advice is to start soon. And if you can't start before July of next year, then finish before the end of 2027. That's the
And
big takeaway.
and what does that mean by project for just clarity purposes for other people? Is this the project in general? Like let's say you're building an entire building, is it breaking ground on building at a period, or you have to be working on electrical and energy side?
So this for what they're counting as construction, or commencing construction. It's specifically for the part of the facility that you're trying to claim the credit for. So
Perfect.
you can have the building, whatever that that's not as important as like, did you buy panels? Did you buy transformers? Have you started
Yep.
doing the electrical work? That kind of stuff specifically for the solar panels. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, very important distinction because I think sometimes people are like, well, if I break ground, then we're good. But
Yeah.
yeah, knowing kind of what category the tax credit does fall under.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. So there are so a little bit just on safe harboring. So you can either start construction. So there's kind of the two paths to safe harboring. You either start construction on the part of the project that you're trying to claim the tax credit for, or you make about 5% of the total spending. So like the total cost of the project, if you start buying things and paying for labor or whatever, then and it exceeds 5%, then you can claim safe harbor. So there are two pathways, and then once you get that safe harbor status, then you have 4 years to complete the project. So 4 years to place it in service. So you don't have to worry about that 2027 deadline. It get pushed out until 2030.
what it sounds like to me is that just with all of the deadlines and all of the rules and all of the this but not that, 60, best to just start putting it into the project anyway. Just because I've been fascinated more so just from the battery side of things. Like literally the advantage of battery in the system has been huge. I mean
Yeah,
that makes I think the biggest difference is seeing like how much is actually being deployed from the battery versus when it just doesn't have a battery period, that energy difference. It's one thing to have the solar, it's another to have the battery.
yeah. They're really, you know, uh, extremely complementary. Um, with battery alone is great, solar alone is great, but battery and solar together, that's the sweet spot. That's where you can really have a lot of control over how much you're paying for power, you know? And
Is that where people should be going also when they're looking at just whether it be tax credits or anything else? Is that kind of the better spend of that money too?
well, I do think the economics are better because for a combined solar storage project in the long term, because you do have that reliability, that predictability of your energy prices over 20 years, which is not something you can say if you are just buying grid power from your utility. Um, so the savings there are potentially quite significant over the long term. So and there's also resiliency, benefits as well. So you can continue to run your operations, power your building, even in total blackout conditions if you have the right microgrid system set up for that. Um,
How are people actually looking at energy right now? And if you're, I mean, CNI, commercial industrial, if you're in that category, um, are you thinking more resiliency or offset of cost and or both? Like, where's that balance? Because I feel like there is both. It's the, well, if grid goes out, we are still operating. Like if you're a food organization or kind of more of a critical but not quite hospital infrastructure, it's like that's usually pretty important, but on the other side, if you're just trying to offset costs, that's another. Is one kind of taking the lead, or are they both kind of hand in
It really
hand?
depends on the use case.
Mm,
Like, like you said, like medical facility, like, the project that we did with San Benito Health Foundation, to, get them solar storage and on a microgrid. Now they can run for days in total blackout conditions, still, serve their patients. That was really important to them, obviously. But, if your business is not as, sensitive to power disruptions, the energy savings are really, that's going to be where your main value is.
yeah, I think there's also the other side of it too that I think as a you kind of have that choice at the moment of I think some of the community saying, hey, with all of these tax credits going away, after that date, it will not be financially viable. Like it was because we were making, really good profits over here, and then it won't be. And then you have the other side of the camp that says, no, it'll still be really profitable. It just won't be quite as good as it was when there was a lot of tax credits. Which one are you finding is kind of the more consistent thing across the industry? Because at least looking at macroeconomics, when you have a surge of demand in any industry, it means that there's opportunity. Whether there's a tax credit or not, just the pure demand and supply says that there's probably something there.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely still going to be a good investment, a good energy solution for businesses after the tax credits expire. I don't think there's any real question about that. Yes, the tax credits were great, but most of the work that they did in leveling the playing field, so to speak, between renewables and fossil fuels was done in the past, has been done in the past. It's already done. The industry is way more developed than it was before the ITC. The technologies are much more affordable, and more productive, more efficient. So right now, the cheapest form of electricity that you can get is from solar. That is kind of tied to the tax credits, but also it's not really because it's the same. It's also cheap in other countries that don't have these tax credits or got rid of them a while ago. And
I
it
think there's a
yeah
there's a misunderstanding of the cost of energy, I think, just for the general consumer and or business is I think the most understanding is that it costs so much to run the coal-fired plant to generate power rather than the distribution. And so I'm wondering about like from the grid side of things, just infrastructurally where we're kind of going as a country. Is that is decentralization more that path forward and because of the generation and the delivery of the power, the keeping more of it for the actual use case of energy, not the transmission of it? Is that where it's going, or and where's the cost traditionally been? Because I feel like it's always been under the man. That must be a lot to build all of those buildings and smokestacks and all of the things.
yeah. Well, there's so that's a big question because it's not just about the technologies that we have. It's about the history, and it's about the policies, and it's about the culture, and it's also about contract negotiations in a in a big way. Um, in California, we have a huge amount of solar curtailment, which is to say we have a lot of solar energy that's being produced during the day that just gets dumped into the ground. Um, like I haven't checked super recently, but it's a significant amount. Maybe a third, maybe
A third?
something like
That's a
that. Yeah,
lot.
Yeah, it's a huge amount. And the reason then that we have that, I mean, there's a few reasons. Part of it is we don't have enough storage, on the grid to kind of absorb all of that peak solar time. But some of it is also that the existing natural gas plants will not ramp down production during times when solar panels are producing, and we know that they will be producing, because there are certain contracts with unions and the utilities that these plants have to run a certain number of hours a day, or produce a certain amount of power, and they're guaranteed that. And so not for any physical reason, but for these contractual policy reasons, we can't turn down these natural gas power plants to take more full advantage of the clean energy that solar is producing during the day. So that's one kind of little example of how complicated and weird and unintuitive this whole system is. And I think that goes a lot into why people are confused about energy pricing, why it's so unclear, because it's very historical, it's very nuanced, and it also, if you're looking at it, if you come at it with, fresh eyes and you're like, I'm going to make an efficient energy system, I'm going to really redesign the grid, you're like, this doesn't make any sense, like this is crazy, how is this all like shoestringed together? And of course, like the reality is there's a lot of people that work really hard every single day to, make sure that we've got, power flowing and, lights on and, everything. Um, but yeah, on the face of it, there are a huge amount of inefficiencies and just kind of things that make you go, huh? Why are we doing that? Renewable energy doesn't really fit into that model, unless you do it the way that the utilities have been trying to do it, which is to build these massive solar and wind farms, like out, far away from population centers, and then build these, high voltage transmission lines. So basically treating renewable energy technologies as if they were the same as the previous fossil fuel technologies, which they're not. You can kind of finagle them to work somewhat similarly, but they're fundamentally different, in many different ways. And so when you're trying to transition to a system that can take advantage of these renewable energy resources to their full extent, you're really looking at distributed resources. So things on rooftops, community solar, uh, small distributed systems that are just kind of ubiquitous, and ideally sited on or very nearby the place where that power is being used, because that is the most efficient way to generate and use power. Because as soon as you start transmitting it longer and longer distances, you get line losses, you lose electricity. There's inherent inefficiency in putting your power sources way far away from the end use. Um, but once you start putting, DERs, distributed energy resources, at the grid edge, on people's roofs, on businesses, etc., then you get this kind of backflow that is not at all anything that anybody at the top wants. And so that's why there's been such a big pushback around things like net energy metering, and even like solar grants and incentives. They've like kind of, it really like exploded in California, right? Like in like the 2000s, 2010s, like solar just went way up. And then they've kind of been tamping it down a bit because it's starting to run to that decision point, that inflection point where like the system either has to go back to the way it was or change to something new. And that means that power is going to shift. And I mean that both literally and figuratively, because as soon as you have businesses, customers, like the average person, being able to generate their own electricity and to shape that load profile to be maximally useful and valuable, then that's one more thing for the CPUC to worry about.
I
And
almost see this as the democratization of
oh,
energy, not so
absolutely.
much the commoditization. Because so many say like, oh, it's commoditizing the industry. Well, energy is a commodity at the
Yeah.
moment.
Hmm.
But
It already
also
is.
it's that democratization. Yeah, because it is very much bottom up at this point where, yeah, it can come from community and power one direction rather than the opposite.
And that's why we named this podcast what we did, Power to the People,
Power
because
to the
that's what
people.
we're trying to do, and in all senses of the phrase.
Where's the utilities place in all this? Because I see this more as of an evolution rather than a revolution in most of this, because we've put so much into our own existing infrastructure. So like back when we did this power infrastructure, not all countries did. So some other countries have a revolution of energy because they waited for technology. We went with one technology and built infrastructure. So what's that evolution actually look like for the US, at least for energy?
Well, there's what I want it to be, and then there's what it probably will be.
I
Um,
always believe the truth is in the middle.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
wherever everybody else wants it ends up being somewhere in the middle, one way or the other.
yeah. So I mean, it's very tough to say. What is going to happen to the utilities. I agree that they're still going to be around. Somebody has to be responsible for the lines, for the transmission infrastructure, and we've had this interesting evolution, in California, and in several other states as well. But it's really, I think exemplified by California is the community choice aggregation movement, sometimes called community choice energy, or CCA, CCE. But essentially, those are nonprofit, publicly run, energy corporations that serve cities, cities and counties, across California, and they basically take on half of the role that was traditionally served by the utility. So they're taking over the generation side of things. So that is like procuring the power. And then the utility still handles the lines. They still handle the grid side of things. So the CCAs will source the power, they'll buy it, and then they'll have essentially the utilities deliver that. And so it's kind of this joint partnership, between these public agencies, which are governed by elected officials from the member cities and counties. So there's a very kind of direct line of accountability for the general public.
I mean, I think we're just getting to this point where I think the discussion around energy and the transparency, more importantly, around energy is becoming more of a topic for people.
Yeah.
I think there was a time where you turned on your light switch and you went, sweet, it works, or it does not. And I think now people are asking, how does it work? Why does it work? And can it be different? Um, and I think that's the coolest part that we get to explore, is that we're real time figuring this out too. And for us to get to share it with everybody, I think is even more exciting. I just think we're at just this really cool inflection point where people are actually curious about energy and we get the opportunity to actually talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to say one last thing about battery energy storage systems, because
Yes.
we kind of touched on them earlier, but I wanted to really particularly call out that Congress decided to spare battery energy storage systems from being cut from the ITC. So unlike solar and wind, battery systems will continue to be eligible for the ITC and the PTC through the 2030s. So regardless of whatever's happening with solar and wind, there's still going to be a lot of incentives out there for battery systems, and I think that's certainly better than it could have been, to say the least, and not least because we've had such an explosive growth in solar and wind in this country, where it's outproducing. Uh, I mean, it's outproducing coal. I think it just took over hydropower too. So it's hydropower plus wind. Actually, solar overtook that in the United States this year. But we need batteries to shape that load. So that is to say, we need batteries to absorb that solar power for when we really need it, to really take advantage of the low cost of that. And the way we do that is through batteries. And so what we do right now for clean energy investment, I mean, I think it's really going to, like, the future in the near term, maybe 5 years, is going to be a lot focused around batteries, especially as the energy demand for AI goes up. The International Energy Agency is predicting that by 2030, AI energy demands will exceed that of the entire U.S. Just within the U.S. will exceed the entire U.S. heavy industry sector. So like all manufacturing, steel production, like refineries, all that kind of stuff, and account for basically half of the total growth in energy demand. Yeah, between
And
and
that's not even water either.
no, that's not
That's
even
just
water, and that's
energy.
just 5 years, and
Wow.
yeah, so we're going to need a lot
It's an
of,
interesting world.
yeah, we're going to need a lot of attention to that because, like I said, how we power, these data centers, this AI over the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to shape our climate for the next 1,000. That's going to be what our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren and our great great grandchildren, that's what they're going to be dealing with, is how we act right now.
I think that's huge. Well, I mean, thank you for this episode. I mean, we're going to come back in the next few weeks, and I want to dive a lot more into CCAs, CCEs, how energy actually functions, but then also dive a bit deeper on batteries. Because if this is the future, let's start to understand it, and what can be done with it and how it works. And I also think some energy breakthroughs are going to be, I think, key to this type of growth if these decisions need to be in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of infrastructure and everything. Well, let's make sure to put everything in the place where we can evaluate everything as best as possible and make a good decision. That's because at the end of the day, I think we've always done this as a society. It's always like everybody just wants to make the right decision. It's just nobody knows. Hindsight's always 20/20, so we don't know what the next 20, 30 years could look like in any particular sector. And right now, it's actually a more important time to do that, but we also get that choice right now. So I think that's the exciting part.
It's really about that future-minded, sustainability-focused thinking, because we can do whatever we want right now. Only certain things will be helpful for continuing the nice standard of living that we have generated with all of our lovely
Well,
technology.
I think about that sometimes though, is like when you think about grandparents and great grandparents and then when they were born and how much that they lived through in terms of technological advancements and how they got from point A to point B, being able to communicate with one another when you're actually out and about, like it was an incredible invention. When you start to look at all of those pacings of inventions and technology and how it's impacted society, sure, we've done it at an alarming rate, but I don't think we even can comprehend, nor did I think they could back then, what the world could look like in 40 or 50 years. Like it, and so it is exciting in one way to see what can it be in 50 years, but also knowing that we're laying the groundwork right now, and it's not, the next generation's problem or the generations after that. It's more like, hey, we're going to do the best that we can for this one and the next ones, and then hope that everybody else does the same thing afterwards too. Either way, it's going to be very exciting. So, Jon, thank you for another excellent episode of Power to the People.
Thank you, Steve.
And we'll be back in a few weeks to chat with you about a lot more info. So,
all right.
Thanks again.
Great.
Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
By giving people agency around their energy, around power, you are giving them power.
This is a moment in time with technological advancement that allows for humans to take advantage of the free aspect of energy.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.